The last thing my husband said to me was something I didn't understand until 3 weeks after his funeral. He was lying in a hospital bed, barely awake, his voice so weak that I had to lean close just to hear him. "Promise me you'll find her." I remember squeezing his hand. "Find who?" He opened his eyes and looked at me. "The woman at the red door." That was it. He never explained. He died the next morning. For 3 weeks, I convinced myself that those words had been the confusion of a dying man. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, I found an envelope hidden inside his old desk. And written across the front, in his handwriting, were 4 words. "For when I'm gone. Find her." My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 27 years. We weren't one of those couples who spent every day telling each other how much they loved one another. We were quieter than that. Our marriage was built around small things. He made coffee every morning. I folded his shirts the way he liked them. He always filled my car with gas before a long trip. I always left the porch light on when he worked late. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Daniel was 62 when he died. He had been diagnosed with heart failure 2 years earlier, and although the doctors warned us that his condition could worsen, neither of us really believed we were close to losing him. He still went to work. He still complained about the grocery prices. He still yelled at the television during football games. He still insisted he could fix things around the house that clearly needed a professional. So when his health suddenly declined that winter, I wasn't emotionally prepared. One morning, he collapsed in our kitchen. I remember dropping the plate I was holding. I remember the sound of it breaking. I remember kneeling beside him while waiting for the ambulance, telling him over and over, "Stay with me." He did. For a while. But the hospital became our second home. There were tests, medications, doctors, nurses, long nights in uncomfortable chairs. And then, one afternoon, the doctor pulled me aside. His expression told me everything before he said a word. Daniel didn't have much time. I went back into his room and sat beside him. For the first time in 27 years, I didn't know what to say to my husband. So I just held his hand. We talked about ordinary things. Our children. The house. The garden. The vacation we never took. Then, sometime after midnight, Daniel woke up. He looked frightened. Not physically frightened. Something deeper. "Linda," he whispered. "I'm here. You have to promise me something. Anything." He stared at me for several seconds. Then he said those words. "Find the woman at the red door." I thought maybe he was dreaming. "What woman?" "The red door." "Daniel, what are you talking about?" He closed his eyes. "She needs you." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. Instead, he fell asleep. By morning, he was gone. The funeral was small. Daniel had never liked attention, and I knew he wouldn't have wanted hundreds of people standing around talking about him. Our children came. A few close friends. His brother, Michael. Some people from work. Everyone said the things people say at funerals. He was a good man. He always helped people. He'll be missed. That last sentence stayed with me. He always helped people. I had heard it several times over the years. But I had never thought much about it. Daniel was generous, but I didn't consider him unusually secretive. At least, I thought I knew him. After the funeral, I returned to the house and expected everything to feel familiar. Instead, everything felt wrong. His shoes were still beside the door. His coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter. His jacket was hanging behind the bedroom door. I couldn't bring myself to move anything. Weeks passed. I tried to return to normal. Then one afternoon, I decided to clean his study. Daniel had always kept his desk locked. Not because he had secrets, but because he worked with financial documents and personal information. I found the key taped underneath the second drawer. Inside were old receipts, photographs, tax papers, and notebooks. And then I found the envelope. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. Inside was a short letter. "Linda, if you're reading this, I'm probably no longer here. There's something I've kept from you because I never wanted you to worry. For several years, I've been helping someone. She lives alone. She doesn't want charity. She doesn't want anyone to know. Please don't be angry with me. When the time comes, find her. You'll know the house because of the red door. Her name is Sarah. She needs to know what happened to her son. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down. Her son. What did Daniel have to do with someone's son? And why had he kept this from me? My first thought was the one I was ashamed to admit. Was Sarah another woman? Had Daniel been having an affair? Had he been living some completely different life that I knew nothing about? I spent the next hour sitting at his desk, staring at the letter. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. But there wasn't. At least, not one I could see. The next morning, I searched through his old files. I found nothing about Sarah. No address. No phone number. Nothing. Then I remembered something. Daniel had a habit of keeping receipts in the glove compartment. I went to his car. There were dozens of them. Restaurants. Hardware stores. Gas stations. Grocery stores. And then I found one from a small pharmacy almost 40 minutes from our house. There were several receipts from the same pharmacy. All on Sundays. I checked the dates. The visits went back nearly 4 years. 4 years. That meant Daniel had been doing something for this woman long before he became seriously ill. I drove to the pharmacy. The pharmacist recognized him immediately. Daniel? Yes. She smiled sadly. I was so sorry when I heard. I swallowed. Did my husband come here often? She nodded. Every couple of weeks. For himself. She hesitated. No. My heart started beating faster. For a woman named Sarah? The pharmacist looked at me carefully. Then she said, I think you should speak to Mrs. Alvarez. Who is she? She knows where Sarah lives. That afternoon, I drove to Mrs. Alvarez's house. She was an elderly woman who had known Daniel through a local community center. When I mentioned his name, she invited me inside. I asked her about Sarah. She sighed. I wondered when you'd come. That sentence frightened me. You knew. I knew Daniel was helping her. Why didn't he tell me? Because Sarah asked him not to. Why? Mrs. Alvarez looked down at her hands. Because she was ashamed. Of what? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that completely changed the story. Sarah's son died in a car accident 6 years ago. I stared at her. What does that have to do with Daniel? Everything. Daniel had met Sarah at the community center. She had been struggling after her son's death. Her husband had already passed away years earlier, and she had no other immediate family nearby. According to Mrs. Alvarez, Sarah stopped paying her bills. She stopped leaving the house. She barely ate. Daniel had volunteered at the center for years, mostly helping elderly people with paperwork and transportation. He started checking on Sarah. At first, once a week. Then twice. He fixed things around her house. He brought groceries. He helped her deal with paperwork. And eventually, he started paying one of her bills anonymously. She didn't want your husband to tell anyone, Mrs. Alvarez said. Why? She believed accepting money meant admitting she couldn't take care of herself. I felt something inside me loosen. The suspicion I'd been carrying for days suddenly seemed ridiculous. But there was still one question. What does her son have to do with me? Mrs. Alvarez looked at me. That's what Daniel wanted you to find out. The following Sunday, I drove to the address she gave me. I didn't know what I expected. A large house. A secret apartment. Something dramatic. Instead, I found a small, aging home at the end of a quiet street. And there it was. A red door. I sat in my car for several minutes. I almost drove away. Then I remembered Daniel's final words. She needs you. I walked to the door and knocked. An elderly woman opened it. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us spoke. Then her eyes filled with tears. Linda. My stomach dropped. How do you know my name? She smiled sadly. Daniel talked about you all the time. I stepped inside. Her house was modest. Clean, but old. There were photographs everywhere. and on the wall above the fireplace was a photograph of a young man. I stopped. There was something familiar about him. Not his face exactly. Something in his smile. Sarah noticed me looking. That was my son, Matthew. I nodded. He looks happy. He was. She sat down. I sat opposite her. Then she reached for a small box beside her chair. I think Daniel wanted you to have this. Inside was a stack of letters. All written by Daniel. But they weren't addressed to Sarah. They were addressed to Matthew. I looked at her. Why was Daniel writing to your son? Sarah's expression changed. He wasn't. She handed me the first letter. I read it. It was dated 6 years earlier. The day Matthew died. The letter wasn't a message to a dead man. It was a letter Daniel had written to himself. He had been driving behind Matthew when the accident happened. Daniel was one of the first people at the scene. He had tried to help. He stayed until the ambulance arrived. And although Matthew died that night, Daniel never forgot him. The letters were Daniel's way of processing what he had witnessed. But there was something else. Something I hadn't expected. Sarah looked at me. Daniel believed he should have been able to save him. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, everything made sense. The Sundays. The groceries. The pharmacy receipts. The secrecy. He wasn't hiding another woman. He had been carrying someone else's grief. And apparently, his own. Sarah and I talked for almost 3 hours. She told me stories about Matthew. How he hated tomatoes. How he played guitar badly but insisted he was talented. How he called his mother every Sunday. That word stopped me. Every Sunday? She nodded. Every Sunday. I thought about Daniel. He had chosen Sunday too. Perhaps that wasn't a coincidence. After Matthew died, Daniel began visiting Sarah every Sunday because he knew she was alone on the day her son used to call. That small detail broke my heart more than anything else. Daniel hadn't just been helping her financially. He had been giving her back a little piece of Sunday. Before I left, Sarah handed me another envelope. "This is for you." It was in Daniel's handwriting. I opened it in the car. There were only a few paragraphs. He wrote, "Linda, I know you may be hurt that I kept this from you. I wasn't protecting a secret from you. I was protecting someone who had already lost almost everything." Sarah didn't need another person telling her how strong she needed to be. She needed someone to sit beside her. I could do that. But if I'm gone, she shouldn't have to sit alone. That's why I need you to find her. Not because you owe me. Because I know the kind of heart you have. And because I think you two might help each other. I couldn't stop crying. Not because Daniel had died. I'd already been grieving him. I cried because I realized how much of him I had never truly seen. A week later, Sarah came to my house. She brought a small cake. We sat at my kitchen table and drank coffee. It felt strange at first. Then she started laughing about something Daniel had done. Apparently, he had once tried to repair her washing machine and made it worse. I laughed too. For the first time since Daniel died, I laughed without feeling guilty. Sarah became part of my life. Not in some dramatic way. She didn't move in. We didn't suddenly become best friends. It happened slowly. Coffee once a week. A phone call. A grocery trip. Sometimes we sat together without saying much. And every Sunday, I visited her. The same day Daniel had. Months later, I finally understood why his last request had mattered. He wasn't asking me to solve a mystery. He was asking me to continue something he had started. One Sunday afternoon, Sarah and I were sitting on her porch. The sun was beginning to set. She looked at me and said, "Daniel loved you very much." I smiled. "I know." She shook her head. "No. I don't think you do." Then she told me something I'd never heard before. A few months before Daniel died, he had told her he was afraid of leaving me alone. Not because I couldn't take care of myself, but because he worried I'd forget how to let people into my life. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "He said you spent your whole life taking care of everyone else." I looked toward the red door. And he wanted you to take care of me? She smiled. No. She paused. He wanted you to take care of each other. That sentence stayed with me. Because that's what we ended up doing. It's been almost 2 years since Daniel died. I still miss him. There are mornings when I instinctively make 2 cups of coffee. There are evenings when I still expect to hear his keys at the front door. Grief doesn't disappear. You just learn how to carry it. But every Sunday, I drive to the little house with the red door. Sarah and I have dinner together. Sometimes we talk about Daniel. Sometimes we talk about Matthew. Sometimes we talk about completely ordinary things. And sometimes we just sit quietly. I've learned something I never expected from all of this. People don't always leave behind the things you think they will. Daniel didn't leave me a fortune. He didn't leave me some grand final speech. He left me a responsibility, a connection, a reminder that the people we love can continue affecting the world even after they're gone. I used to think my husband's last request was a mystery. Now I understand. He wasn't asking me to find the woman he had been helping. He was asking me to make sure she wasn't forgotten. And perhaps, without realizing it, he was asking me not to disappear into my own grief either. The strangest part is that I thought I was going to the red door to help Sarah. But when I look back now, I realize something. She was waiting behind that door for me too. And maybe that's what Daniel knew all along. Sometimes the last gift someone leaves you isn't something you can hold. Sometimes it's a person. A person you would never have met if they hadn't left you first. And every Sunday, when I pull up outside that little house and see the red door, I still imagine Daniel sitting beside me in the car. I can almost hear him saying the same thing he said in that hospital room. She needs you. And now, finally, I know exactly what he meant.